What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
Aloha, America. Welcome to our show, and this is day 2 of our show here on the Rense Radio Network, and it does sound like we seem to have our technical issues a little bit more in hand, a little bit better, and let me brighten up the sound here coming from the headphones. I sound a little more like myself now. We got a lot of stuff to talk about today. Brett's in the control room. The phone lines are open, 877-342-6673, 877-342-6673. A lot of stuff going on here, but I want to start with this video that has hit the web as of yesterday and is already going viral all over the place. It's on the whatreallyhappened.com website under the headline, TSA sexually assaults my mother. It's also been relinked there by members 2 or 3 times. This thing is going viral all over the world. And basically, it is a video that was shot by a traveler of his mother, basically going ballistic, because she was sexually assaulted by TSA, who are putting their hands places where most people don't want hands to be put. And, of course, this is TSA's way of punishing you for not wanting to go through these X-ray machines, which they're absolutely convinced are perfectly safe, and MIT and Johns Hopkins say are not. So they basically abused this woman. They reduced her to tears. They did that to my wife. Last time we had to come back from Kauai, same thing, put my wife into tears. And this guy's getting it all on videotape, and, of course, it looks, really bad going out there viral on the Internet. And the TSA Schutzstaffel comes over to the guy making the video and says, You cannot make a videotape here. It is nicht verboten. And the guy asks a very reasonable question. If it is against the law for me to be taking a videotape here, what is the actual law that I am in violation of? Give me the site. Give me the legal, the little number, the section of the code that we're doing, that this is doing wrong. And the guy can't do it. The guy cannot do it and come up with the law. And his attitude is, you do what I say because I have a badge. I have a badge, too. I have a leftover badge from Hawaii 5-0. I got it in a Cracker Jack box. A badge does not give you any real authority. I have a sheriff's badge left over from a movie I did years and years ago. A badge does not give anybody any authority. The authority rests with the law. And if that TSA SS guy has a law that we're in violation of, he should present it. He can't just sit there and give orders like this and go, seek Heil, seek Heil, seek Heil. So what I want everybody who has seen this video, if you are as offended by this video as I am, if watching this woman reduced to tears by being groped and fondled by this subhuman creature in a blue shirt. Hitler had brown shirts. TSA has blue shirts. Same manure, different orifice. If you are as offended and upset as I am, please make a point of copying off this video or the URL and mailing it to everybody, and go out to every travel or tourism website that you can and post it. Because we got to get the warning out to anybody who might be thinking of vacationing inside the United States this summer. We got to warn them what they're headed for. We got to warn them. If you come to the United States of America on vacation, you're going to be treated like a POW everywhere you go. Nobody needs to spend their tourism dollars to be treated like that. And then once tourism in the United States collapses completely and the airlines and the buses and the trains are all driven out of business, then the TSA will go away and we'll be free from those terrorists. Now, real terrorists, if there were any, would be laughing themselves silly at how the TSA has done more damage to the United States of America and the Bill of Rights and the constitutional principles the nation is supposed to be founded on than 100 Osama bin Ladens ever could have if he hadn't died 10 years ago. And I want to end this little tirade with this quote here. The ability of TSA screeners to stop prohibited items from being carried through the sterile areas of the airport fared no better than the performance of screeners prior to September 11th, 2001. That's Richard Skinner, the Acting Inspector General of the Department of Homeland Security. Department of Homeland Security is admitting TSA is no better at protecting airlines and passengers than the screeners they had before, who did not have to shove their hands down your pants and look at you naked. Billions and billions of dollars, Michael Chertoff and his investors in Congress getting rich, and we're no safer. We're just angrier. We're angrier at this police state. Now, a little bit before, I said, real terrorists, if there were any. I don't think there are. I think they're all phonies. I think all the terrorists running around, they're fakes. Like, Adam Gadon, his real name is Adam Perlman. They take a towel, wrap it around their head, and they go, I'm al-Qaeda, I'm big and scary, woo! Come and bomb us, or we're going to get you. And it's all a hoax and it's all a fraud. And I'll tell you why. Department of Homeland Security has already admitted that when they send practice bombs through the TSA inspections, half of them get through. When the Department of Homeland Security runs their own drills, their own safety drills. In fact, there was a big scandal earlier in the year where a DHS inspector down, I think it was in the Dallas-Fort Worth airport, got a gun through the TSA, even including the naked body scanners, 6 times in a row without being discovered. Now, if you were a real terrorist, as opposed to these dime store phonies that are put up in the media to justify invading other countries, a real terrorist would accept a 50% chance of success getting a bomb onto an airplane. And because they're intending to die anyway, if they got discovered at the gate, blow up the gate. Because the socio-political intent of the act of terrorism is to disrupt normal American life. Like the TSA hasn't already done that for them. But if you blow up that security gate, you make Americans afraid to go to the airport. That's just as good as making them afraid to get on the airplanes. From a terrorist point of view, that target is just as good. If there were real terrorists out there, we would see not only airplanes falling out of the sky, we would see the gates being blown up. But we're not seeing it. It's all a fake. It's a hoax. All war is based in deception. When the government says we got to go invade all those terrorists who are living over our oil, they have to trick you into it. They have to come up, they have to convince you that there's no choice but to throw your money and the lives of your children onto the sand on the other side of the world for God, the flag, mom, and apple pie, and, of course, unending access to free oil from somebody else's land. They have to trick you into it. Nobody wants to go to war. It's disgusting, dirty, dangerous, hard work, poorly paid, and you have a really good chance of losing important parts of your body. So every world leader that wants to start a war of conquest has to trick their people into it. And that's what all this Adam Perlman and Joseph Cohen and Zachary Chesser, who are running around pretending to be Yusuf al-Khattab and MZ al-Amrika and the Revolution Muslim website in Brooklyn, New York. They're not being run by Arab Muslims. They're being run by phonies. Adam Perlman, Adam Gadon, the so-called American al-Qaeda. His real name's Adam Perlman. He's the grandson of a member of the board of directors of the ADL. It doesn't get more obvious than that. It's just theater to trick you into supporting wars of conquest. And the TSA is there to sort of browbeat you into going along with it. They have never actually caught a real terrorist. They have, however, stolen a lot of electronics from luggage. They just busted another guy today. They've certainly angered the American people. Goodness knows how many sexually transmitted diseases they've spread around the population because they don't change those gloves for every person they grope and fondle. Those gloves are for the TSA agent's protection, not for you. And I'm not too sure but what those TSA agents aren't already coming to work with a bunch of diseases anyway, but that's another matter entirely. And, of course, behind all of it, we have these scanners, especially the terahertz radio scanners. Nobody knows what they can do. TSA is insisting they're safe, but they rig their own tests. MIT and Johns Hopkins are already saying those terahertz radio waves can destroy skin DNA because of a process called molecular resonance, which is not well understood. In fact, World Health Organization just the other day said, the radio waves from cell phones are capable of doing exactly the same kind of damage, and so they're recommending everybody use the earpieces, which is safer anyway if you're driving. But those TSA workers at the airport don't get it. They don't understand that the people who make money off of those machines don't care about the TSA workers. They don't care. They're just there to sell the machines. Just like those shoe store fluoroscopes back in the 1930s and 1940s. And the government said those were safe. The Surgeon General put out a training film about the best way to use these shoe store x-ray machines to make sure that your shoes fit healthy and comfortable. It made you a more efficient worker. And then in the 1950s and 1960s, the shoe store operators all started dying of cancer. And that's what's going to happen to these TSA workers. And the people who make money off of these machines, they don't care. They're money junkies. They don't care if people die from their machines. They're there just to make a buck. And it's just a huge joke being played on all of us to extract money and obedience, although I don't know how obedient we're being. We're reaching another flashpoint. We had one that came really close last Thanksgiving where TSA kind of backed off because too many TSA guys were going to the hospital with broken noses. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. So we're finishing up on this video from the TSA harassing yet another person at the airport. We've seen these tapes before where they're going into little kiddies' pants and things like that. And they just arrested some TSA worker for child molestation. I mean, can you imagine the kind of sickos that apply for work at the TSA? You know, I want to run my hands all over total strangers' bodies, and I want to look at naked people all day and get paid for it. And as a side benefit, I get, laptops and iPods and digital cameras and things like that to hand out for Christmas presents. And they're clumsy, too. They dropped and smashed a laptop of mine, and I'm still, I'm carrying a grudge. You want to know? Yes, I'm carrying a grudge. So we're looking at a police state here where SWAT tactics have become the norm. Now, we already know about this situation where Jose Guarana was basically just blown to pieces, literally, during a kick-down-the-door invasion. But there's another story that came out today, and it's on the front of whatreallyhappened.com, and the headline is, "What are our rights against search and seizure?" And it's detailing this dynamic entry arrest into this home, where the police came in, and it was not immediately obvious they were police. The people inside the home thought it was just thugs breaking in. And they grabbed these people, and they threw them around, and there was a pregnant woman who got thrown around by the police, and she miscarried. A guy couldn't speak English, thrown on the ground, and beat up on the ground by the police. So what did they all do that deserved this treatment? Were they building a nuclear bomb? Were they growing anthrax in their bathtub? Were they harboring illegal aliens or terrorists? Actually, no. Apparently, this had something to do with somebody at that residence accessing a website that was on a government watch list regarding child porn. And here's the interesting part. The offense took place over a year ago. And everybody who was in the apartment when the police kicked down the door, none of them had lived there longer than 7 months. Whoever actually did the computer thing was gone. And the police kicked down the door and just abused everybody in there. They killed this woman's baby. And they're out there saying, we're there for, your rights, and we're here to keeping the nation safe. No, you're not. Remember all those really tacky movies you used to see about how the Nazi Gestapo would kick down the door at 2 a.m. and just rough everybody up and take them away? It's happening here. This kind of behavior, kicking down the door, beating up a pregnant woman till the point where she miscarries over an alleged computer access incident that happened when somebody else was living in the building. That's completely inappropriate. It's part of the terror campaign. The only way the government can keep you from standing up and saying you're fired, the way they did in Egypt and Iceland, and soon to be other places, is to keep you afraid. That's the job of the police kicking down the doors for no crime at all. That's the reason for the TSA literally abusing you, sexually molesting you every place you travel, is to keep you afraid. Who are the biggest terrorists in our society? ABC, NBC, CBS, PBS, Fox News, the United States government, TSA, DHS, their job is to keep you afraid. And they don't care that you're afraid of the government. As long as you're afraid, you will stay silent. And that's what they want. It's called political repression, keeping the people down. We're under the jackboot right now. And just as I got upset, I couldn't even get to sleep last night, just thinking about this videotape of this woman standing in this airport, having been sexually molested in full view of total strangers, and she's screaming for the police to come help her, and the police show up, and they act like she's the one who's wrong. You know, how dare you complain when we run our hands all over your body? That's not the way life is supposed to be in the United States anymore. Fourth Amendment? What's wrong with you? If we abide by the Fourth Amendment, the terrorists will win. Don't you understand? You have to get naked by the government or the terrorists will take over. And I get angry about things like that, and I get angry about pregnant women who miscarry because they're thrown against a wall by the police who are trying to track down a year-old crime that took place before the people living in the house they've just kicked the door to even got there. So I went out there on the net to do a little research. You know, there's been a shooting of a cop. He was in his patrol car. Somebody pulled up and just opened fire on him. They don't know if he was dirty, whether it was a turf war. You know, a lot of cops deal drugs. When I was going to Cal State Fullerton, the best drug connection in town was a California Highway Patrolman who was just selling the stuff right out of the back of his black and white. So maybe it was a turf war, whatever. I don't know. I really don't have any sympathy for him. I'm sorry, I don't. But we always hear about, police have been killed. It's an affront to society and civilization and morality. Says, okay, but we also know that the police are killing a lot of people who don't deserve to die with their tasers, or they shoot them by accident. So I went out there and I said, how many Americans have actually been killed by the police inappropriately in the United States? And I figured it would be easy to find because back in 1995, the United States Congress passed a law saying that the police departments had to keep track of this information of Americans who were shot down by the police inappropriately. And it was all supposed to be collected in order for the public to know what's going on. But apparently, since 1995, the way the data is collected and collated, you can't actually find out that information. Imagine my shock. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And still working through some over technical issues. It's better. Let's not kid ourselves. It's better than it was yesterday. So anyway, we're talking about the police. We're talking about this abuse, this brutalization of the American people. And there's one reason for it, besides this idea of just keeping everybody too afraid to stand up to the police, is that the police departments are actively recruiting and giving hiring preference to returning veterans from the war zone. And on one hand, while you can certainly applaud and understand wanting to give jobs to these returning veterans as a reward for their service to the United States government, whether you agree with the reasons for that service or not, but at the same time, you have people coming back from a war zone who are inevitably going to fall back on habits they've had over the last few years. And this is why you get the American police treating the American citizen the way the Army treats the Iraqi or the Afghani people. And we already know that is not pleasant at all. We do have an interesting story, though, out of Kansas City suburb where the police were called to deal with a wildlife problem and saw this very fearsome apparition on a lawn. And they set up a sniper detail, and they fired at this creature, and they put a couple of bullets into it before they realized that they were shooting at a concrete statue of an alligator. Ooh, I am really impressed. It's not exactly Hawaii 5-0 out there. Oh, my goodness. Meanwhile, down in Martins Ferry, former police chief Barry Carpenter has been indicted for stealing firearms from the police department, presumably the evidence locker. One more story that we got here. Over in Baltimore, there's been this interesting story, and it's supported with a videotape, and it's also at whatreallyhappened.com, where a photographer was taking pictures of trains. And he was detained by the police, who told him it was illegal to take pictures in public places. Now, again, we're hearing this from the police. We're hearing this from the TSA. We have not actually heard of an actual real law. It's a lot like the income tax. Everybody says that's the way it's supposed to be. Nobody can actually come up with a real law passed by the Congress and signed by the President that says it's illegal to take pictures in public places. We know they're starting to pass laws to make it a crime to take photographs of meat packing plants and other such farming agricultural areas because of the abuses going on there. That they don't want made public, but just out there taking pictures of trains. And in this case, the guy had a very benign reason. He's an engineering student, and his engineering focus is on public transportation, something that everybody says we need right now. And so he's out there taking pictures of how other people have solved problems he'll have to deal with, and the cops give him a harassment. And I have a strong resonance with this story because I did visual effects on the TV series Lost for most of its run out here in Hawaii. And during season 2, we had this sequence we had to shoot up on the top of the parking structure of the Dole Cannery in Honolulu. We had to make it look like it was Los Angeles, and we had to put a whole bunch of LAPD police cars there. And we didn't want to bring cars from Los Angeles, and we didn't have enough here in Hawaii that we could paint. So we only had 2 LAPD cars or lookalikes that we moved around, and we took a lot of pictures and we put it all together in the computers. But I was up there shooting some what are called plates, a high-resolution digital camera, and I'm up there shooting stills of the background of the Honolulu skyline and the Ko'olau Mountains. And I get hassled by the police and the Department of Homeland Security. You know, why are you up here taking pictures? This is Hawaii. You know, tourists come here to take pictures. Yeah, but you're not in a designated tourist area. You're supposed to take pictures of hula dancers and girls in bikinis. What are you taking pictures of the mountains for? And I explained to them what's going on, and they call the production office to verify that, yes, this guy really does work on the TV show. And that's how completely over the top they are, because it's a parking structure. It's not something a terrorist is going to attack. These people are just justifying their budgets and their salaries and their fancy uniforms and their blue shirts and their badges by going around harassing people and calling it national security. For the rest of the season, I was wearing this little badge I made up that said, "Please don't shoot me, I work for Lost." I mean, that's just how completely absurd it is getting there. All right, I'm going to move along here. Other situations. As you know, the situation in Libya is deteriorating. The United States is continuing to bomb those people until they decide they're going to love us. And according to Al Jazeera, Western troops, presumably British and some American, are already on the ground, which is in complete violation of the United Nations resolution regarding Libya. So we've already invaded the place under the pretext of helping one side or the other, and we're still not sure which one it is. Going in there and basically clobbering the place for daring to have a government-issued currency based on gold rather than submit to the will of a private central bank and a debt-based currency, which has done such a wonderful job with the American economy. So, Dennis Kucinich basically went into the Congress and he proposed this resolution to basically end U.S. involvement in the Libyan war. And the Republican leadership in the House of Representatives postponed the vote because they're afraid it might pass. So here we have soldiers, the war going on in Libya. The American people are tired of war. We've got more wars. We can't even keep track of how many wars we have. How many wars do we have to be in before it's a world war? And I think we're already over the line. And so Dennis Kucinich comes in to represent the will of the people that we want to get out of this war. We don't want any more wars. And he brings it to the House of Representatives, and on a quick little informal tally, it looks like it's going to pass. And so the Republican leadership postponed the vote. They won't let it come to the floor because they're afraid it will pass. And then they'll have to stop playing over there in Libya. And if they stop playing in Libya, then Gaddafi goes back to his gold-based, value-based African currency that everybody wants to sign on to. He'll be free of the private central banks, and we can't let that happen. Because of the rest of the world sees how wonderful the life can be in a country that does not have a private central bank and a debt-based currency, there'll be more revolutions, and that's what they're afraid of. The money junkies have almost succeeded in bringing the entire planet underneath this pyramid scheme called a debt-based currency and a private central bank. It took 3 tries for them to get it here in the United States of America and bring our nation to the edge of ruin. And when they do that, what do? They say, oh, well, you can go get more money. You can borrow from the IMF, which is just a bigger version of the same scam. But not all countries want to play that game. And every country that tries to break free of the private central banks, they get bombed. Iraq wanted to get away from debt-based currency. They wanted to get away from using the dollar for the oil currency. Instant war. Iran's been making the same noises, and look how hard they're trying to sell a war there. Gaddafi establishes a gold-based dinar issued by the government without a private central bank, and sure enough, we're in there bombing the place. Look at how the Federal Reserve, the pyramid scheme called the Federal Reserve, has destroyed the United States economy. Do you really want your children to die in a war to force this same crooked system on the rest of the world? Because that's what's going on. You're being asked to sacrifice the lives of your children to make the world safe for private central banking. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors, taking calls.
We will not go down in the night without a fight. You can burn up our mosques and our homes and our schools, but our spirit will never die. We will not go down in Gaza tonight.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go to the phones. George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? George, are you there? Going once, going twice. All right, well, we're going to move on right now here. So we're talking about the fact that the war in Libya, the vote on that Dennis Kucinich brought to the House has been postponed because they're afraid it might actually pass. And then they'd have to stop the war, and where's the fun in that? I mean, really. Meanwhile, NATO has offered sincere apologies for killing Afghani civilians who just happen to be standing where they live. NATO, I guess, basically they called up and said, no, really, we feel really bad about it, honest. You know, we're sorry. They're not going to stop sending those drones in there, those little robotic spacecraft in there, or aircraft to kill things, but they feel bad about it when they get a civilian. You know, here's the interesting thing. When somebody comes into this country and sets off an explosion and it kills a bunch of innocent people, they call it an act of terror. So when NATO or the United States sends these robotic aircraft into another country, ostensibly to wipe out a bad guy, and they take 40 or 50 innocent civilians with them, why is that not an act of terror? I think that's a reasonable question we need. Certainly the people on the ground who are catching the shrapnel can be forgiven for seeing the United States of America as a far larger terrorist than al-Qaeda. I mean, I'm not counting the phony al-Qaedas running around here. I mean, all of al-Qaeda's, that's why they're trying to rebrand as the Muslim Brotherhood, because that's Muslim Brotherhood, which is not open to confusion. See, al-Qaeda, the literal translation of that means the base, and it's thought to have originated at CIA Langley with the database of the Mujahideen fighters who aided the Central Intelligence Agency against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. This included Osama bin Laden. He worked for the United States for a while. His older brother, Salem bin Laden, was business partners with George W. Bush in a company called Arbusto Energy. Died in a small plane crash. It's amazing how that happens, isn't it? So that's where al-Qaeda came from, but there's a problem with using it as a big, scary name to scare Americans into going along with the war on terror, because in Arabic slang, al-Qaeda means toilet. And Araisha al-Qaeda means I'm going to the bathroom. And if you're a real terrorist, are you going to name your outfit the toilet? No, you're not. Can you imagine going into a room and saying, we're here to terrorize you. We're from the toilet. And everybody goes, and we get Ahmed, the dead terrorist, to come in and say, silence, I kill you. And so basically this whole al-Qaeda nonsense was dreamt up by somebody who had a basic working knowledge of Arabic, but absolutely no awareness of colloquial slang. And so now they're trying to rebrand. Oh, forget about the toilet. That's so last year. Now it's the Muslim Brotherhood. And it's the same thing. They're trying to concoct a big, scary Emmanuel Goldstein to make you think that we're under danger from those gosh darn Arab Muslims so that you will throw your money and the lives of your children into conquering other people's oil fields and making the world safe for compound interest. But history is not on our side here, because Iran, and by the way, the former head of the IAEA, has once again come out and said they never found any evidence that Iran is building nuclear weapons. Remember the lies about Iraq's nuclear weapons? And then they turned around and said, well, yeah, we were wrong about Iraq, but trust us, Iran is building a nuclear weapon and they're in danger and we've got to invade and we've got to put sanctions and we've got to wreck their economy and we've got to do terrible things to them. Because they're evil. They're Muslims and Muslims are evil and they're dangerous. And they're not. When the Iranian people finally woke up to just what a raw deal they got under the U.S. puppet, the Shah, and they fired him, and they became an Islamic republic in 1979. And from that year to this, Iran has not invaded any other countries. Can't say that about Israel. Israel went in and bombed the power station at Osirak in Iraq, claiming they were building nuclear weapons there. And after it was all over, inspection showed, nope, it was just a power station. Israel's attacked Lebanon. They've invaded Lebanon. They're probably going to get ready to do it again because they're lusting after that Litani River. They've been slowly, covertly invading the West Bank, Palestine, and Gaza, just grabbing a little more land and putting up Jewish-only settlements and saying, oh, we need it for security, and we'll just take a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. Bombed Syria. And it just goes on and on. And the United States, talk about constant state of warfare since 1979. Macedonia. Grenada, Libya, Syria, all those, over and over and over again. Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Somalia. We got people somewhere killing somebody pretty much all the time. So when somebody comes out and says Iran is the threat to world peace, you know it's a crock. Because of the three countries, Iran, which is Muslim, Israel, which is Jewish, and the United States, which is officially secular but predominantly Christian, there's only one that is really living a peaceful life, and that's Iran. They're just minding their own business. And they're not building nuclear weapons. It's just the same old lie they use to trick you into supporting the war in Iraq, and they're trying to get you to fall for it so you'll support the war in Iran. And they sit there saying, you're a coward if you're not willing to throw your children into the war in Iran, and you're a traitor, and you hate the flag, and you're an anti-Semite, and all the rest of this other stuff that they scream to try and flog you into supporting this war. But we're on the wrong side of this one because Iran is not the problem. They're not the aggressors. They haven't attacked us. Thousands of years ago, Sun Tzu wrote a book called The Art of War, and in it he says, all war is based on deception. Which means that when a leader wants to start a war, he must lie his people into it. Because otherwise they're going to say, yeah, if you want to attack, you go attack them. Leave us alone. We're not going to do this. So, now speaking of lies to start war, you probably heard earlier in the week where the United States adopted as a new policy that cyber attacks are going to be construed as an act of war. And just amazingly, talk about an amazing cosmic coincidence at the same time, U.S. government official email accounts through Google are being subject to a phishing attack to try and obtain information about their private financial matters, their addresses, and so forth and so on. And fingers are pointed at China. Oh, gosh darn those Chinese hackers. Now, first of all, why would China do such a stupid thing? Because right now, look how much money the U.S. government owes China that they can't even pay back. The U.S. government is looking for a reason where they can tell China to forget all about, the money that the U.S. government owes them. They're looking for a reason they can stiff China on that debt and still come out looking like they've got the high moral ground. Yes, we owed them trillions of dollars, but gosh darn it, they did bad things. And so we're justified in telling them not to expect any money from us, because if we give them the money, they'll just use it to do more bad things. And for that reason alone, China's not going to do something that stupid to provoke such a reaction. They know the U.S. government is looking for a reason to get out of the debt. Second of all, computer criminals, hackers, routinely route their attacks through third-party machines to conceal the origin of the attack. We have a lot of hacker attacks against the servers for whatreallyhappened.com, and many of them have come from Chinese servers. But we know from the nature of the attack underway, it's not China that's doing it. Somebody just got into a machine in China and said, okay, we'll pirate this machine and then we'll use it as our little cutout. That's all it is. It's a cutout. The Chinese are as much a victim in this thing as anybody else. But the U.S. government is looking for a reason to hostilize China. They're not our friends anymore. They were our friends when the U.S. government was borrowing money from them. But now that China really can't afford to buy any more of our debt and they're starting to try and, get the loans paid off, and the U.S. government's, they're our enemies now. We have to demonize them so that we can justify saying we're not going to give you back the money that we borrowed because we're good people. So, meanwhile, here in the United States of America, the economy is not looking good, and China can be forgiven for thinking that they're probably not going to get most of the money back they loan to the U.S. government. Our entire economy has been running on debt for so long, and I don't mean just debt as in borrowing money, but in using debt as a product, buying and selling debt, that whole mortgage-backed security situation, and nobody in the banks, nobody on Wall Street, nobody in Washington, D.C. was even giving a moment's thought to enabling the American people to pay the debt off. That's why you had the U.S. government giving tax incentives to corporations to send high-paying jobs to other countries. It increased the debt, which increased the profitability of dealing in debt, but it left the country without a way to pay any of it off. Not that we ever could. Because remember, the whole idea of a debt-based currency issued by a private central bank, it's a pyramid. The debt always exceeds the available money in circulation. Once you submit to the enslavement of a private central bank with a debt-based currency, you can never pay it all off. I mean, the illustration is really absurdly simple, and I'm surprised more people don't understand this. But let's say I'm a private central bank, and I have this pretty printed piece of paper. It's just ink and paper. There's really no inherent worth. And I loan it to you, and you're either a private businessman or you're the U.S. government, and you do your commerce, and then you hand this piece of money back to me, which means you have no money at all. And I'm sitting here saying, yeah, but you still owe me 10 cents of interest. And the government and the businessman said, well, I don't have that. I said, well, then you're going to have to do what I say, and I'm going to take your home and your business and your assets because you're still in debt to me, and you have no way to pay it off. Therefore, I own everything. And it's a trap, and it is a scam, and all it costs the money junkies is ink and paper and bribes to corrupted politicians. And the smart people of the world are realizing it's a scam and it's an enslavement method, and they're standing up and they're saying, I'm not going to be a slave anymore. Happened in Iceland, happened in Egypt. They're trying as hard as they can to bribe the new government of Egypt to go back into enslaving their people, to the pharaohs of the banking industry. There's going to be a fight over there. Greece is expecting there are going to be more riots there. As the bankers come in and say, tax the people, give the money to us, don't spend anything on them, and then give us all the things that the people used to own, but because that's now the collateral. We're going to take a break for commercials and news, and we'll be right back with hour number 2 of our show.
What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show for hour number 2 here. The phone lines are open, 877-342-6673, 877-342-6673. Now, if you spend a great deal of time obtaining your propaganda from the corporate TV networks, you have probably been told over and over again the economy is in a recovery. Everything is all better. Just stay patient, and eventually peace and prosperity will return to the United States of America. Well, it may just be that the government and the media have been fibbing a little tiny bit. As you know, there was a major drop in the stock market yesterday, and the reason for that is that data on the performance of the United States economy came out yesterday, and it's not good at all. The data is essentially falling off a cliff into the al-Qaeda. And according to Mike Riddle, who's a fund manager at M&G Investments in London, it's just this horrific situation where, again, the country has been using debt as an economic product, and they don't have a way to pay it back. And that we were hearing them talk about yesterday that they couldn't find the yield. They couldn't find the yield. Everybody owes everybody money, and nobody is working to pay it all off. Because remember, when you have a debt-based economy, everybody trying to pay the debt off reduces the total amount of money in circulation, and everybody is scrambling to keep the money in circulation. And ultimately, all of it is getting sucked up by these black holes of debt created for us all by the privately owned Federal Reserve Bank. And that is something that Americans need to remember. The Federal Reserve is not part of the government. Their pretensions to the contrary notwithstanding. They're no more federal than Federal Express or Federal Pizza or any of the other companies you'll find in the phone book that put federal in their name that are not actually on the government section of the phone book. When the founders of the Federal Reserve met on Jekyll Island, they chose the name Federal Reserve in order to gull the American people into thinking it was an integrated part of the government. But it isn't. It's a privately owned bank. They decided they did not want to use the Bank of the United States because they'd used that name twice before, and the American people understood the Bank of the United States had nothing to do with the United States. It was a way of looting the wealth and productivity of the people for the benefit of the bankers. And if you want to know what kind of a job they were doing, you need to go back and read Andrew Jackson's comments about the private bankers, where he called them a den of vipers, and he shut them down. He shut down the Second Bank of the United States, and there was an immediate attempt on his life, which fortunately failed. And then you had Abraham Lincoln, who reverted to his constitutional authority of issuing money from the government, the greenbacks, rather than enslave the white people to 30% per annum interest to the banks in his war to free the black people. And immediately after Lincoln was assassinated, the U.S. Congress took the greenbacks out of circulation and returned Americans into the slavery of the private bankers and their notes. And then you had John F. Kennedy, who also understood the Federal Reserve was destroying the United States of America, destroying its productivity. And he issued Executive Order 11110, taking the remaining silver that was in Fort Knox, most of it recovered from the Taliatrons from the bomb effort, and he issued about $4.5 billion worth of United States notes that allowed the American people to conduct their business without having to give a piece of the action to the Federal Reserve. 5 months later, John F. Kennedy was shot dead in Dealey Plaza. And you've heard all this thing, oh, it was Lee Oswald, it was the Cubans, it was whatever. Well, there were a lot of people who wanted Kennedy dead. But remember, when the Warren Commission was put together, one of the members of the Warren Commission was John J. McCloy, president of the Chase Manhattan Bank, president of the World Bank. And I don't care how good a banker he is not qualified to investigate the murder of a president. So he was on that Warren Commission to make sure that the investigation did not lead to the financial dimensions. And yes, as soon as John F. Kennedy was dead and in the ground, the Congress recalled the U.S. notes and destroyed them. There are a few examples still remaining in the hands of collectors. I have a couple of them myself. They did exist. They were real. And we were sold back into the slavery of the Federal Reserve System. We're going to go to the phones here. We've got Clarence in Oklahoma. Clarence, Osseo, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha there, Mike, and it's great. Congratulations to hear you on to track you down, to find you here on the network. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about there. The I myself am of such an age to give it away. I've got them there somewhere, but I have some of those old red. They have a red seal on them instead of a green.
That's right, they do.
And it has at the top United States note. And you're right. They may be worth something. I don't know. They may be worth, well, they were worth something then, but I don't know.
They were worth their equivalent weight in silver. They were basically, it was a renewal of the silver certificate. And again, especially for the young people listening, Clarence, give me a minute. I want to educate the young people listening to this show.
Okay, cool.
When the United States was started, the dollar wasn't the paper note. The dollar was the silver. And I had one here, and I see, oh, there it is. The dollar was the silver. The word dollar actually means a weight measure of silver going back to the Thaler mines of Germany. The paper notes were simply a claim check, and the original paper money of the United States of America said that you could take that paper note to the bank and get $1 worth of silver or gold on demand. The paper note was just a claim check, but under the Federal Reserve System, that paper note is the money. It's not exchangeable for anything. And if you look at how many of those paper Federal Reserve dollars it takes to buy a real silver dollar now, you'll see just how much the currency of the United States of America has been debased by the Federal Reserve. And what's really amazing is that everything the Federal Reserve is legally allowed to do today was a death penalty offense under the Coinage Act of 1797. If you were debasing the currency, if you were issuing paper notes for which you didn't have any backing, that was death penalty offense. Because the money, the dollar, was silver and gold value-based coinage. And the bankers hate that because they can't charge interest on money that you have in your hands that you actually own.
Absolutely. And I remember when I remember the silver certificates. They were the denominations were only 1, 5, and 10, but it said at the very bottom.
Above that, they were gold certificates.
Yeah, and above, at the bottom of them, under that little deal there at the bottom, it said redeemable in silver. At the I forget where it was either the Federal Reserve or something. I don't know how that went, but it was redeemable in silver. And I remember one of the first people that I finally, I actually got an inkling of that things weren't going well, and my dad and I watched, my late father and I watched him every Sunday. There was a fellow out of Dallas, Texas named Dan Smoot, who had a little newsletter called, for this region, the Dan Smoot Report. And he'd been an FBI agent in World War II. The Army wouldn't take him. And he figured out what was going on. And I saw him speak live downtown at the Civic Center, and he got into the money thing. I mean, he wrote a book called The Invisible Government, which, I mean, that's the real primer for everything that people have found out up to this day, or one of the primers. And that was all the interlocking, the Council on Foreign Relations, the different foundations and all that. He'd been an FBI agent. He knew how to investigate things. He documented all of that. And he said, and right now, and it is about 1965, and that's when they took the silver coins out of circulation.
That's right. We got these little clad slugs. And now it's looking like they did the same thing to the gold bars in Fort Knox. They're just tungsten cord fakes, but as long as people go on believing it's money and believing it has real value, the scam will continue to work.
I'll never forget.
But all of this was a death penalty offense under the original laws of the United States of America. These copper cord quarters, would have gotten you executed before. But then the private bankers take over. Congress changes the law to make counterfeiting legal for the Federal Reserve, and that's why our nation is in the mess that it's in right now.
Exactly, and I couldn't help but laugh during his speech. And I got his autograph on his book. I bought it. And he said he said this is what he predicted a lot of the things that we're talking about right now, because he could see the trends. And he said they stopped issuing the silver certificates, the United States notes, that's real money, and he was one of the first to expose the Federal Reserve as being a private bank. The average bearer out there doesn't have a clue. Just because they say federal.
That's exactly right, because the schools and the media are constantly teaching us. They have this myth about banking that you take your money in, you deposit it, and the bank loans it back out at interest. And we're taught in the school that this is the way the banks work, and it isn't. It absolutely isn't. Clarence, we got to let you go and take a break here for commercials. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. So we're talking about the economy, and the news is bad. Housing prices have hit a new low, and what this means is more Americans are now underwater with regard to their mortgages. They owe more to the bank than the house itself is now considered to be worth, and more Americans are just saying, this is nonsense. The reason we agree to pay the banks 2 to 3 times what the house itself actually costs in interest was the promise that the house would appreciate in value and we'd get all that interest back from the next generation of suckers to fall into this compound interest trap. And now that promise is not being kept. These people went into the bank, and the bank said, yeah, you do pay us 2 to 3 times what the actual house costs in interest over 30 years, but, you'll get it back at the end, because the house always increases in price. Only it didn't happen, and so more and more Americans are voluntarily walking away from their mortgages. They're finding it's cheaper to go out and just rent someplace, and live month to month and not have to deal with all this credit reporting stuff. But as of the latest set of numbers, it's officially a double-dip housing recession. We're going into another drop in prices, and the banks are absolutely going crazy right now because they've got all these foreclosed properties they've been trying to hold off the market in order to keep prices from being depressed even further, and it's happening anyway. Real estate was the biggest and longest-lasting bubble of them all, and it is bursting right now. I mean, if you really think about the house that you were in as a kid and how much it cost and how much it costs now, but it's the same house. The house that I grew up in Loudon, New Hampshire, your basic New England farmhouse, cost my parents $5,000. Yes, that was back in 1959. Today, it's priced at $250,000, and each succeeding owner was willing to go to the bank and borrow $5,000 to buy the home, and then pay the bank $25,000, depending upon the rate of interest on the mortgage, over their lifetime to own that house, on the promise that when they sold the house for their retirement, it would have accumulated a value equal to their original purchase price and all the interest they paid to the bank. And here's where it gets really bizarre. Because when you buy a house for, let's say, $100,000, and over the course of a 30-year mortgage, you're going to pay the bank, $300,000 in interest in payments, interest in principal. Okay? Now, the people who built the house, who had the land, who went out there with the hammer and the nails and the wood and the wiring and the piping, and they built the house, they get the $100,000. And the bank gets $200,000 in interest. And what did they provide? Paper and ink. That's all it cost them. Paper and ink. The reserve system of currency is based on belief. You are taught to believe that it's money. You are told you cannot have an alternative system of money. In fact, there's some interesting developments in the Bernard von Nothaus case, where it appears that the government in its public pronouncements regarding the law under which he's being prosecuted may have lied to the public. That in point of fact, there is no law that allows Congress to say that alternative private monetary systems are illegal. And we already know that because we've seen trade dollars on Maui and Catalina trade dollars and these wooden nickel little promotional things that local markets will do. Those are alternative currency systems, and nobody arrests them. The only reason they went after Bernard von Nothaus is he put Ron Paul's picture on one of his coins, and George Bush got upset. And they went after him, and they're trying to retroactively justify shutting him down and confiscating all the silver and gold from his clients. But it's not legal. It's just part of that fraud. The whole economic system of the United States of America is a gigantic fraud. It's a pyramid scheme. And I know a lot of Americans who have been brainwashed by public school and the media can't see it yet. But it is really very, very, very simple, because the private central bank was given the lawful ability to counterfeit, to print up paper notes that have nothing backing them. And they They loan them out at full face value, and you must work in order to acquire enough of those paper notes to pay back to the bank plus interest. But with all of the economy going through the bank, it becomes a trap because more money is owed to the bank than is ever actually in existence. And yes, when a new generation of borrowers comes in to take out their mortgages and their car loans, and they just type more money into the system, but the debt goes up faster. And that is the trap. And that's why eventually you wind up with an economy where up until really the last 10 years, we were still one of the manufacturing powerhouses of the world, and yet we're still hideously in debt. Why? Very simple. The banking system that we were enslaved to in 1913 is designed to make you a slave to the bankers. That's its purpose. To convince you that this debt is a real thing that obligates you to do what the bankers want you to do, such as, oral gratification in the hotel where Dominique Strauss-Kahn was doing this thing with the maid. That's the attitude. You owe me money, therefore you will do what I want. But it's an illusion. It is an illusion because this debt that accumulates to ink and paper is no more real of an obligation than allowing somebody to tell you what to do because of divine right or chattel ownership of people. We understand now, entire generations of black people were constrained to do what plantation owners told them to do because they believed that chattel ownership of other humans was real. And we know it isn't. And we know today that divine right is a myth and a fable. But it worked because the workers were convinced to believe that it was real. Just like we've all been brainwashed to believe that compound interest and private central banking and debt-based currencies are real. And they're not. The real currency was the currency the country started with, silver and gold. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go to the phones. George from Texas. Aloha. Welcome back. Sorry we lost you the last time. And what's on your mind?
Well, how you doing, Mike? You're talking
doing
about
fine.
The police. Yeah. Mike, you were talking about the police the last hour. And the thing is, especially these local municipalities, I don't know if you probably dealt with this in Hawaii, but I remember in the city I lived in, they got a new mayor, a new city council, and replaced with a new police chief. And everything was just going just fine prior to that. But then they decided, well, we're going to do some revenue generating. And all the restaurants they had around all served alcohol and food. So every time a car would pull out of the restaurant, the cop would pull them over to see if they were drinking. This chased away all the business downtown. Have you dealt with that problem with the police?
Oh, absolutely. Out here, we have a major crime problem going on here. There's drug dealing going on, and we have a friend of ours who's in the Honolulu police force who has told us the budget for any kind of crime investigation has been slashed, and all the effort right now has gone to the traffic division because they're out there writing tickets. The Hawaii legislature basically just tripled all the traffic fines, and they're out there writing tickets because that's the only way they can keep the police department running. I mean, the tax revenues have absolutely cratered. TSA has destroyed our tourism economy out here, and nobody in our state government is willing to stand up to the federal government and say, you guys are strangling us to death, because everybody in the governor's office and the state legislature, they're all thinking, I wonder if next election I could move to Washington, D.C.
Yeah. The thing is, I'm reading about what the TSA might be backing off, changing its policies. I don't buy that for one bit. They might change their policies for a short while, but I really think that's just a lull the states to sleep thing. You see, you don't need to pass a law. We're going to stop. And I'm like, this is something I'm really suspicious.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't take their word about it. I mean, the biggest reason to distrust them is they are part of the United States government, and right now the credibility of the United States government is absolutely in the al-Qaeda, especially after that nonsense about Iraq's nuclear bombs, Mr. Bush. But the TSA I think what may be going on is Obama is coming to understand that the TSA is becoming a serious political liability. And that far from being psychologically intimidating to the American people, that TSA is rapidly turning into what could be the flashpoint for an absolute uprising by the American people. And I've been writing about this at whatreallyhappened.com that, we all want to avoid a violent revolution. I am still hoping that the U.S. government is going to collapse the way the USSR did, and they'll be done and gone and out of here, and there won't be a lot of bloodshed to have to apologize for after the fact. But if a violent revolution does come to the United States of America, I fully expect it to begin at an airline gate, where some TSA bozo is going to reduce some other woman to tears, and, some guy's instincts of protection are going to kick in, and it's going to start a fight, and 100 travelers who are standing around holding in years of rage at the humiliation they suffer traveling around this country, they're going to pile into the melee, and you're going to have the TSA having to choose between backing off and starting to shoot into a room full of innocent travelers, and we're going to wind up with America's version of Amritsar, and it will just escalate from there, because this revolt may start in the airport terminals. It won't stop there. Go back and look at how Romania fell. Basically 9 days from a political rally turned into a spontaneous riot, and 9 days later Ceausescu was machine gunned to death on national television. Egypt's government was gone in 18 days. It could happen that the Soviet Union we didn't even realize there was a revolution going, and all of a sudden they were collapsing. It could happen that fast in the United States. I think it will happen that fast here in the United States of America.
Well, the thing is, talking to my Russian friends, they no longer have a hatred for us. They have sympathy for us.
Yeah.
And and the thing is, it's more like, and I say, I thank Russian Prime Minister Putin and Medvedev trying to stop World War III from happening. They're not out looking for a fight. They're just trying to stabilize the world.
Yeah, they're trying to calm everything down, and it is almost a mirror of World War II, where you had, Germany was engaged in war, and Italy got in, and Japan, and they said, we're going to remake the world for our own interest, and the rest of the world had to unite together against them. And now we're in the reverse. It's the United States and Israel that are out there provoking all these wars and trying to change the world to suit their own financial interest. And the rest of the countries are saying, we got to back off on this kind of situation. And Putin seems to be trying to calm things down a little bit. I wish the United Nations would show a little more gonadal tissue when it comes to the United States of America. But, the biggest reason that we need to avoid getting into a new world war is we're going to lose this one, guys. We don't have the money, we don't have the manufacturing capacity, and we don't have the boots on the ground to win a new world war. Of course, as I said yesterday, the bankers don't care. They don't care which side wins or loses a new world war, because everybody goes into debt, and that's what the banks want. They want us all enslaved to debt.
Well, the thing is, going down to Houston, I see a lot of homeless veterans down there. That's your Iraqi war and Afghan veterans. The thing is, and I've talked to wives, they are so burned out of their husbands being deployed, and they're going into a nervous breakdown, and it's like, our country cannot take another conflict.
No, we really can't. We're already in the world war. They just won't admit it. And looking around at the country, we're losing it. We're already losing it. And we're on the verge of a collapse here. And frankly, I think the sooner it happens, the better it's going to be for everybody, and we can save a few lives. What's really interesting, I have a very good friend of mine who is from Spain and was there when Franco was doing his thing. And he says he tries to tell people here in the United States of America that he sees all of the symptoms of fascist dictatorship all around him. And some people listen to him, but he says a lot of people are still in denial. They still want to wrap that flag around their head and use it as a blindfold and say, no, we could never be like those other countries because we're America. And if you think about it, that's a racist attitude, to think that we're immune from the evils of other countries and other governments simply because we're Americans. It doesn't work that way. And, we're a large, powerful nation, but we have corrupt politicians, and we have money junkies running our financial system for their own benefit. And you've got, like, Lloyd Blankfein at Goldman Sachs is out there screaming that he's doing God's work by making millions of Americans homeless. And I guess, if you look at that part of the Talmud that says, the Jews are supposed to have all the money, no matter what it takes, then I guess, he is doing God's work as he sees it. But, that's the attitude that we have out there in our nation's financial system, that they're there to take care of themselves, and the American people are just to be sacrificed to make sure that the books are all balancing. What's his name during the congressional hearings? Damon Slivers. when they were talking about this whole foreclosure mess. And he says, we can deal with the foreclosure problems, or we can preserve the capital structure of the banks, but we can't do both. Which are we going to do? And obviously, in hindsight, the U.S. government said, we got to protect the banks. We have to take care of the banks. And if Americans are made homeless, well, gosh, that's just a sacrifice that, we're willing to make.
You're right about people being in denial. They think of if they just don't deal with it, it will just go away. It's not going to go away.
Well, the Germans made that mistake. The Germans made that mistake. They sat there and said, I'm a good little German, and I know we're on a wrong direction, but I'm not going to stand up and speak out against the Führer and his government. And then look at what happened to Germany at the end of that war, the starvation, the disease. They made a really huge mistake. We should not make the same one. Thanks a lot for the call, George. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Finishing up on the economy, do you remember way back in 2008, 2009, when the U.S. government was just flinging your tax money far and wide and saying, don't worry, you're not going to lose anything, you'll get it all back down the road? And they were doing the TARP thing and handing out the money, and they said, we don't need any oversight. And I'm trying to remember that comedian who was saying, oversight, we need receipts. And now the government is finally admitting that, actually all that bailout money we gave to the automotive industry, we're not going to get that back, but, that was a great sacrifice for you, wonderful, swell American people to make, to keep our American auto industry going. By the way, I don't know if you're a fan of the Top Gear series on BBC or not. And I mean the original. They've tried to clone it around the world, including in the United States. It really didn't work. The original one, I think they're in their 15th or 16th year now. And it is a very enjoyable show, even if you're not really into cars. It's just a fun show to watch. And when you hear them talk about American cars, for the most part, they don't have a lot of respect for American cars, certainly compared to some of the wonderful machinery we see coming out of Europe. My own car is a good example. I've had a Nissan before that was made in Japan, and it was an absolutely wonderful car. I've got this Nissan, was made in Tennessee, and it's crud. It's really crud. And the government chose, during the beginning of this economic meltdown, to throw all kinds of money at the American automotive industry because we got to prop them up. Well, you know something? There's a problem with propping up failure. You get more failure. We should have let the auto companies collapse and make way for somebody who can make a better product to come in and get a chance to get started, not just preserve the established status quo. Same thing with Wall Street. We should have done what Iceland did. Throw the crooked bankers in jail and fire the government that helped them loot the public. And Iceland's economy is now on the way up. Probably going to see that happen in Greece. Already saw it happen in Egypt. By the way, Obama, as poverty-stricken as we are here in the United States of America, Barack Obama was able to somehow find $1 billion to give to the brand new government of Egypt to get them to go back to selling Egypt's natural gas to Israel at below market prices. Israel didn't want to pay fair market value for the natural gas that they get from Egypt, which is about 40% of their annual need. They didn't want to pay retail, and so they go to Obama and they say, you make them sell it to it. And that's what Obama does. He takes $1 billion of your tax money and gives it to the new government of Egypt to sell their natural gas to Israel at below market rates. It's the same corruption that got Mubarak in trouble in the first place. I think it's time for the Egyptians to maybe think about changing their government again. You've done it once before. You can sort of get into a pattern of doing it over and over again. French Revolution is a good example. It wasn't just one revolution. They went through several governments before they finally got one that said, we better start taking care of the people instead of the bankers. Or they're writing our name on the government office doors in dry erase marker. Little scandal that's come out here, the big money center banks in the United States of America made a huge profit by borrowing from the Federal Reserve at a very low rate, then turning around and loaning to the federal government at a much higher rate. The obvious question is, if the federal government needed to borrow this money, why didn't they go to the Federal Reserve? which is what they normally do. They print up some T-bills and they give it to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve prints up some Federal Reserve notes and gives it back. It's all ink and paper. It's all ink and paper. And the T-bill is basically a promissory note that the federal government will flog you or your children or your grandchildren to work to pay off this debt somewhere down the road, except the debt's going up faster than anybody can pay it off. So in order to get these big, large banks back into profits, to save the banks, the federal government, instead of borrowing the money it needed from the Federal Reserve, went and borrowed from these big money center banks at higher interest rates, which you are going to have to pay. And these banks just borrowed the money at lower rates from the Federal Reserve. It's like free money falling on these bankers. And this is considered wise management? I don't think so. We're going to go to the phones. We've got Mark in Texas. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I just wanted to say we're glad you're back. We really miss Claire.
Thank you.
And you really hit on the topic that exactly what I wanted to talk about was the fact that we went through a spell when the Chinese quit buying our debt. And when we went through that spell, and what people need to understand before I get to that is that the Federal Reserve pays the mint to print the money.
Yes.
And then that we pay interest on that money. And then they sell it as T-bills and bonds. And then the Federal Reserve started buying that back because the Chinese quit buying it. And
now the Japanese cannot because of Fukushima.
Exactly. And that's exactly where I wanted to interject where you were going with the whole thought is the fact that we're paying interest twice to the Federal Reserve for them to allow us to borrow our own money.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And the Federal Reserve can then turn around and loan you a bunch of money and then turn around and by printing up more money, like quantitative easing 3, reduce the value of the money in your pocket. It's like the evil dark wizard, Ben Voldemort, sitting in his palace at the Federal Reserve, waves a magic wand, or actually he turns on a switch, and the money you've already worked for, the money you've already saved, starts to lose value. He's taking real worth, real purchasing power out of your pockets by remote control and drawing it back to the central bank. The bankers could never do that as long as we had a value-based currency because the worth of the money was under the control of the people actually holding the money. But these paper notes, the value of them, the real value of them can be changed just by turning on the printing press, and that's exactly what's going on. And that's why the dollar has lost like 95% of its real worth since 1913 when the Federal Reserve came into existence. They've simply inflated the value of the dollar away. And the only way they can keep the Ponzi scheme going is to just run up that printing press again. We're going into the same hyperinflation that destroyed Germany in the run-up to World War II. And you know how Germany got out of that. And there's an object lesson for you because Adolf Hitler, and no, I'm not a big fan of Hitler, but he did do some things right, like the Volkswagen and the Bauhaus. Adolf Hitler got rid of the private central bank with their debt-based currency. And he went back to the same model of economy that the United States had started with. The currency was issued by the government, and it was based on a unit of value. It was not based on debt, and it was not under the control of a private central bank. And it worked so wonderfully for the German people. It was called the German Miracle. And Adolf Hitler was Time Magazine's Man of the Year for turning Germany's economy around and just lighting up the whole place. And they were prosperous, and the people were very, very happy. And the rest of the world's bankers said, we can't have that. We can't have a government-issued currency making the people rich because only the bankers are supposed to be rich. And they organized a global boycott against Germany for the express purpose of destroying the new German economy and forcing them back into the grip of a private central bank and a debt-based currency. And that set the stage for World War II. That's really the origin of World War II, was the global boycott to destroy Germany's newly emergent economy because it refused to allow a private central bank. And
well,
that's
Mike,
really what it is.
if
when
I
we
can
talk about,
interject,
yeah.
If I can interject here, that's when Hitler declared labor worth value.
That's right. That was the unit of value. It was a unit of labor, and it worked. Money doesn't have to be based on silver or gold. It can be based on anything of value people agree to. They're even starting to sell copper as an investment unit. But everybody has to agree it's a unit of value, and it must be available in enough supply that the banksters can't play speculative games with it. That's why I don't support going back to a silver or gold standard in the United States of America, because right now most of the gold and silver is in the hands of the very same bankers who've already ruined our economy, and will just trade one slave system for another. But when they talk about the clash of civilizations as justification for all these wars, what they're really talking about is a war between banking systems, between the model of the private central bank and the debt-based currency used to enslave nations versus those nations who don't want to play that game, like Libya, like Iraq, like most of the Arab Muslim world. That's what this whole world war is about, is a war between the enslavement by compound interest and people who just want to have a government-issued value-based currency that they can use without having to give the bankers a piece of the action for everything they're doing in life. That's really what it comes
Mike,
down
the other thing, real quick to interject, is the interest rate. The interest rate is poison. If it stays down, it's poison. If it goes up, then our debt goes up with it, and the clock starts ticking faster. And that's the key.
Well, the problem is, as long as the interest rate is always positive, debt always exceeds the money supply. That's the trap. We were trapped in this system as soon as 1913. Woodrow Wilson, who signed the Federal Reserve Act, admitted in his own diary years later that he had destroyed the United States of America as he had known it prior to becoming president. And he knew that the nation was doomed even back then. It's taken 100 years for this pyramid to build to the point where it's collapsing, and it's collapsing now. And when we start thinking and planning about the nation that we want to have here after the current government is gone, rule number 1, no private central bank. Rule number 2, no private central bank. Rule number 3, no private central bank. And I'll let the rest of you argue about what the other rules are going to be. But we have to have a nation where the government issues its own currency on a unit of value, no debt, no private central banks allowed ever, 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 ever. We've had 3 of them. They've destroyed the nation every single time. 3 strikes and you're out. We cannot allow this to ever come to this land again.
Mike, I appreciate you taking the call. Tell Claire we love her. Look forward to her being on the show as soon as possible, and great show.
All right, well, thank you very much, and yeah, we'll have Claire on the air just as soon as she wants to come in and contribute something. So thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're coming up here on the end of the show, and I am so glad things ran so much more smoothly today, and thanks to everybody in the control room, Brett and Todd, who just are working their fingers to the bone to get all these last little details taken care of. That's it for our show. We will be back tomorrow, Friday, here on the Rents Radio Network. And I almost forgot where I'm working right now. So until tomorrow, stay safe, stay well, stay angry, stay skeptical, and aloha, America.